asking me if I was her mommy. I finally told my mom, Mom, tell her you're her grandmommy. You're telling her the truth. You're not lying to the child, but you're using this comforting term, mommy. Say you're her grandmommy. And that's what my mom did in the short time in that month that we had them. This court didn't get it. The court found that the husband is desperate and angry, found that he's paranoid, that he shouts at his children, that he's demanding, abusive, and controlling. That's all part of the decision. But that's not child abuse. There were no welts on the children that this court could see. This decision was upheld by the Sixth Circuit. We appealed to the Supreme Court. They didn't hear the case. So a year after my parents brought their children home from Mexico, after we risked our lives, frankly, going down to Mexico in a very dangerous situation, facing people with guns, it's a long story. My parents were ordered by this court to return the kids to the man who killed their mother. One of the saddest days in my life was watching my mother turn over her grandchildren, aged 10 and 6. We were on the tarmac in a Nashville airport, hiding from the press, which covered this case. And my parents believe in following the law, as wrong as it was. They were sent back to Mexico. Now, when you undergo tragedy, I think there's 3 major responses. One is to be just depressed, to be sad, to go into your room and put the covers on, stare at the wall for hours, and retreat from this very unjust world. And that's an understandable response. Another response is anger, destruction. This world is unfair, I'm gonna tear it down. And you can understand people who feel that way. My family took the third option, to make things a little better for others. It was too late to save my sister. She was dead. We never thought we'd see the children again. But I marched into I actually went into a Tennessee legislator's office, the guy I represented, state legislator like I'm gonna be, in Nashville, and said, you need to change this law. And he said, Mark, you're a lawyer. You write me the new law. So I did. Tennessee law said that if you abuse a child, you can lose custody of children. Well, that makes sense. We don't want people who abuse children to have custody of children. But if you abuse your wife, or your husband, or your girlfriend, or your mistress, or whomever, if you would abuse an adult, if you kill your wife, no harm to children. Didn't happen in front of the children. It wasn't in the law. The law said if you abuse children, you're a child abuser. If you kill their mother, that's not abuse. So I went to this legislator and I said, do you think that's abuse? He said, yeah, I think that's abuse. I went to Republicans and Democrats. I went to the House and the Senate. And in a very sharply partisan atmosphere, I'm proud to say that every Democrat and every Republican in a Democratic-controlled branch of one branch of the legislature, Republicans controlled the other branch, the governor was Republican, I'm a Democrat, didn't matter, unanimously. Tennessee passed a new law. Today, the law in Tennessee is if you abuse anyone in your household, you can and should lose custody of your children. Think about why this is so important. If you ask a victim of domestic violence, and I'll say her, although I recognize that there are some men, but 95% of the case, the roll bank is women. I'm confident it's over 90%. If you ask a victim of domestic violence why she stays, some people think, why does she stay? She knows he's violent, and they put the blame on the victim. These women will tell you, particularly if they have children, yeah, I knew he was violent. Yeah, I knew he was dangerous. My kids were there. Laws often didn't protect the children. And I was willing to risk my life to help them save theirs. That's an understandable response from a mother. That's, I think, why my sister stayed so long. This law in Tennessee, and one that I plan to pass, a similar one in Virginia, yeah, I'm a partisan Democrat, but I think Republicans can agree that domestic violence is wrong, and that if you murder or abuse anyone, you're not a good parent. 5 years or so after we thought we'd never see the kids again, the Mexican people had enough. They rose up against my former brother-in-law. He had cheated and harmed so many of them that they formed a protest group against him. They put posters all around their little town. They pressured their legislators. The Mexican people of Ajijic kicked my brother-in-law out. Mexico expelled him. They didn't extradite him for the murder conviction that the Mexican government knew about, the sealed. No, they just expelled him. They had enough of him. He was harming too many of the Mexican people. Good for them. They helped me. I helped others. They helped me. They helped my family. As soon as he arrived in the United States, he was put in jail. He then hired a hitman to kill my parents. Nice guy. And in August of 2006, 10 years after my sister was missing, my former brother-in-law was convicted and sentenced to 56 years in prison. He's currently in a Tennessee penitentiary. The children came home to my parents. I won't go into the details of their scars. I will save that privacy for them. I will tell you that I told you my parents were great parents. They took them in, and 10 years later, my nephew has graduated college. He is working as an engineer, doing fantastic things. I'll brag a little. He has a patent to use an iPhone to use ultrasound waves to cure eye disease. Yeah, I couldn't do anything like that. Very impressive. My niece, who is younger, is studying to become a nurse. Interesting that the fields they want are to help others. But the scars remain. The scars remain. And as I talk about their privacy, I'm immediately, anytime I talk about this, there's always a balancing act. I don't want to invade their privacy. Their acquaintances don't know that their father killed their mother. Their friends know. It's not their fault at all, but it's a burden that they will carry for the rest of their lives. When I first ran for office, this is my second try, I didn't win my first try, ran for Congress. I didn't initially talk about my background. I got to tell you, plenty of people that knew me, my close friends knew, but my acquaintances, the people I worked with, the people in Barney Frank's office, they didn't know that my sister had been murdered by her husband. It was all over the news in Nashville. You can Google it and read about it all you want. They didn't know. I didn't tell them. I guess my thought was it was none of their business. When I ran for office, I ran on all these other things I'd done. Didn't talk about it. Until an acquaintance of mine, not a close friend, but a good acquaintance of mine, someone I'd known for 10 years, we went to dinner, and she told me how she had been sexually abused by a family member. And I didn't know that. I'd known her for 10 years. I didn't know that. And she reminded me that this is widespread, that I knew that this does happen in all families. It's not just the developing world. It's not just lower income people. It's everywhere. And we talked about a couple people who just run for office. Well, Carolyn McCarthy ran a few years back. You may remember her. Her husband was murdered on the Long Island Railroad. And she ran for office talking about gun regulation. Just recently, Cree Deeds, Virginia legislator, his son almost killed him, did kill himself, had mental illness. Cree had tried to get his son into a hospital, but there weren't enough beds available. Now, Cree could have taken that private tragedy, that horrible tragedy, he loved his son very much, and left it private. But he went public about it because he knew we needed more help for people who suffer from mental illness. So my friend said to me, do I want to see measures like the ones I took in Tennessee worldwide? I said, damn right I do. She said, so why won't you talk about it? I said, well, people may think I'm exploiting it to get elected. She said, do you think Cree Deeds was exploiting his son? Do I think Carolyn McCarthy was exploiting her husband? I said, no, I think they were brave people. And she looked at me and I knew exactly what she meant. And so I started talking about it a lot. Talked about it all during my last race. Indeed, I was the only candidate, and I don't mean to disrespect the other four who ran, but I was the only candidate that mentioned domestic violence, sexual violence. It's 1 in 5 women in the United States. So I'm going to encourage, and it's a personal decision for everyone, I'm going to encourage everyone to come out. I'm a gay man. I can tell you that coming out has done a world of difference for gay equality worldwide. When we were in the closet, no one knew we existed, and very little was done, and there were legal and social prejudices. There's still tremendous legal and social prejudices against the LGBT community. But coming out has definitely led to our strength. Look at just the transgender movement from Caitlyn Jenner as one example that just happened. You know one person in this situation, you have compassion for all. So if you have been a victim of domestic violence or sexual violence, or your sister or wife or daughter or husband, son or brother or cousin or friend, and you have permission to talk about it, please talk about it. It's not on the news. We're watching violence abroad, and we're not watching the violence that occurs right here at home and in every country on earth. 1 out of 5 American women, I don't know the statistics worldwide, but please don't think it couldn't happen to you. I didn't think it could happen to my family, but it did. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
I'm not sure what to say. That was astonishing. Thank you. Fortunately, I don't have to, because we have a panel here today that are going to discuss this issue in a lot more detail. So let me introduce our panel members. First of all, our moderator is Dr. Makan Fardas, who is a clinical psychologist and member of our counseling team. Makan brings to our unit, and soon to all of you, a deep understanding of the dynamics of domestic abuse that comes from both his clinical and academic background. He received his medical degree from the Mashhad University of Medical Sciences in Iran, and his doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Montana. Prior to joining us at the bank, he practiced at Georgetown University and the University of the District of Columbia, and he maintains a private practice in Washington. He is also a board representative for the Institute of Contemporary Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis in Washington. Tali Sadan is a domestic violence and sexual assault therapist at the Women's Center in Washington and a survivor of domestic and sexual violence as well as stalking. During her work with the Women's Center, she created a curriculum that speaks to her clients' strengths and engages their resiliency. Tali offers trainings to groups from various professions that focus on the relationship between domestic violence and mental health issues, as well as ways of helping members of the community better understand and normalize mental health issues. She is a member of the DC Victims Assistance Network and its Mental Health Subcommittee, as well as the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence's training work group. Neil Irvin is the executive director of Men Can Stop Rape, which seeks to mobilize men to use their strength for creating cultures free from violence, especially men's violence against women. Well known throughout the country in the field of gender-based violence prevention, Neil currently serves on the Department of Justice's National Advisory Committee and is a member of the Novo Foundation's prestigious Move to End Violence initiative. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland's School of Public Health and has been a regular lecturer at American University, George Washington University, and Howard University. So, Makan, over to you. I think we have about half an hour. Is that right? I think so. Okay.
Is everybody awake and alive? Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. This was really powerful. I stayed glued to my seat as I was listening to you, and very moving. One of the things that was striking to me personally was the stark contrast that I think exists between genders as far as who seems to be the perpetrator and who seems to be the victim. I was hoping maybe, Neil, you would tell us a little bit about what happens to young boys, I think, as they set out to be young men and adult men, and how do they become that?
Sure, thank you. And like you said, Mark, I thought it was great to hear. I think it is important. I'm glad that we have some men here, and it's always, When we started as an organization 20 years ago here in D.C. and now working nationally and internationally, you wouldn't even see the few men that are here in the room. So it's good to see, and I think we need to congratulate the World Bank and others to know that this is an important issue that needs to be a part of everyone's everyday life. And so when you ask, where do boys learn to be men, not only here domestically but globally? What are the traditions, the cultures, the behaviors, the attitudes that shape how boys perceive what is acceptable for their interpretation or presence as a man? And unfortunately, what happens for us, and a lot of the work that we do in primary prevention, intertwines what we call dominant stories and counter stories. These narratives that boys know and are socialized in, that teaches them very narrow understandings of their social emotional development, right? It tells them that as a boy, you can only show a few emotions. You have to disconnect and ignore the rest of those emotions. And you develop a pattern of behaviors that are monitored by other boys and adult men and adult women and other girls, that says if you step out of that pattern of socialization, you are somehow less of a man, and you will be a target for other men and women and boys and girls' violence. And so as boys, we learn really early, stay on track. Do what we're told our culture tells us is acceptable for being a man. And many times, unfortunately, that's intertwined with a lot of self-destructive and harmful attitudes and behaviors that impact them for the rest of their lives. And so for us, the impact of engaging boys we believe our work is from conception throughout the lifespan, and that we want to regularly model for boys what healthy masculinity looks like. We want to increase their social emotional intelligence. We want to give them muscle memory and practice around empathy and sympathy and compassion. As Mark said, if you can see it in one person, if you know one person, then you can do that for a broader group of people. And so what happens, unfortunately, is that we don't see domestic violence in the news, but we are entertained by it. It's television programs, and as Mark said, it existed before there was a TV. But now it's been ratcheted up in the lives of our young people and our boys particularly, and so they are now comforted, entertained by expressions of patriarchy, misogyny, heterosexism, homophobia, and it is unexamined. And so our work is about trying to help boys look critically at the lessons and the messages they're getting about who they are as men, and support them as adult men in their lives, trying to role model the behaviors and attitudes that we think promote positive social interactions, high IQ with their social emotional intelligence, and really prepares them to be allies and community members for us all for the remainder of their lives. And so that for us is what is important around. We're not beating up on men when we talk about the violence that we as men perpetrate, but we're being honest about what we think masculinity is capable of in terms of mobilizing and being allies with our female peers to prevent violence against girls and women.
Wonderful, thank you. Tali, you work at the Women's Center. What kind of people come to you, and how do people even know that the type of relationship that they're in is in fact abusive?
That's actually a great question. People come to us through DC's very robust network of agencies that are there to help people who are victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, as is Neil, part of that network. And part of what
You turn it on.
Push.
Oh, sorry.
okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. So when people come to me, they typically come for issues regarding domestic violence or sexual assault. But something that you said, Mark, really caught my attention, which was, how do people actually know that they are in domestic violence relationships? And the reality of it is that most people that do come for therapy come for many other issues. They may come for eating disorders, unhappy in my marriage, unhappy with my career, lots of other presenting issues. And very often you find that under all of those is a relationship with abuse, whether it's directly in a relationship that's abusive or having grown up witnessing abuse, like your niece and nephew, unfortunately. But all of us are affected by that. So 1 in 5 may experience it directly, but I feel so many more people experience it indirectly, and I think could have just as much of an effect on them as well. I personally grew up witnessing it, but in not in a violent way, but just a very mild emotional abuse, control. I don't know if any of you have heard of the example, the term gaslighting, which is kind of making you feel like you're crazy, making you feel like you're losing your mind. So witnessing that, and just like men may be socialized to believe that this is what a man behaves as, this is how you are as a boyfriend, as a husband, us women are as well. So I learned this is what it means to be a woman in a relationship. Being submissive is okay. It's okay, it's good. And okay, I'm not arguing with that, but it's very easy in abusive relationships to fall into submitting to control and becoming so emotionally vested that relationship is everything. That's the air you breathe, it's everything that motivates you in life. So the clients that come to me may not realize that the relationship that they're so emotionally vested in is abusive. My job is never to tell anyone to leave their significant other. Never. I will never tell a client of mine, you have to leave. As many of you know, it may be even more dangerous when you do leave. But my job and the job of our team at the Women's Center that work with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault is to teach you a healthier relationship with love. And when I say love, I don't mean just romantic love, but love for yourself, love for what it is you do, love for your children, for your pets, for your career, for anything that you live for, what healthy love means. And so that's the project, the mission of the Women's Center's program is to help redefine that. And in doing so, when you develop a healthier relationship with love, the answers will come to you about your own relationship.
Wonderful, thank you. I just wanted to remind the folks who are watching us on web stream that the questions that the country offices might have can be in fact sent to us via email. As later in the day we open the floor for questions for the audience and also for the country offices, please feel free to email the questions to DA Prevention, that's Delta Alpha Prevention at worldbankgroup.org. We will be taking questions from country offices as well as the audience on the floor here. Neil, I wanted to come back to you. It sounds like I think what you were saying a little earlier is that we as men grow up with a certain set of standards, and those standards aren't always inclusive of kindness to other people. One thing that comes to mind is that, well, is there an alternative, healthier type of being a man? What is healthy masculinity?
Sure. I mean, I think the challenge is, and as an organization, we would never go into, based here in Washington, D.C., and having worked in all 50 states, about 8 countries internationally, and we regularly get to receive delegations from the State Department, the United Nations, to, as was spoken of earlier, many different countries trying to prioritize this work. We would never say that there is one definition and men can stop rape as the answer. But we do think there's some characteristics that are connected to what are expressions of what ultimately becomes our humanity. We're talking about, again, this social emotional intelligence. We're talking about gender equity. We're talking about seeing the intersections of class, privilege, race, homophobia, heterosexism, and trying to have a lens with which you can understand it first as an individual, right, from socio-ecological model, right? You want to look at how it is impacting you. You want to think about the relationships first in your life. You want to then think about your community and the larger society. And so at a macro and a micro level, we think that there are elements of a young person's own development that we need to lift up more around, as I said earlier, empathy, sympathy, compassion, self-esteem. We know that the protective factors and risk factors in young people's lives, the more nature-nurturing environment, The more nurtured in a healthy environment you are, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to develop on track. You know, you're not experiencing abuse, you're not witnessing substance abuse, you're not witnessing physical harm, you're getting good nutritious food to eat. All those things speak to youth developing in a really powerful way. Now, if you're compromised because you're witnessing abuse, you're compromised because you're being abused, you're compromised either directly or in some subsequent way, that's going to restrict how people start to develop their own kind of survival instincts. And we know that then that young person finds himself in a relationship. Mm-hmm. And if you've survived in abusive relationships, you may continue to survive in an abusive relationship and see it as uneventful. This feels normal to me. And so I think what we, again, try to really emphasize with the young people that we work with, and when I say young people, we start, this summer we run summer camps. Our young people, we had a camper who was 5 years old, and we run programs on college campuses with being run by our graduate students as well. So when we talk about the conception throughout the lifespan, it is at each developmental stage a different type of intervention that really tries to lift up the power of masculinity in a positive way that allows them to express it as uniquely themselves, individual to their own kind of passions and beliefs, but to see it as a resource to the relationships they're in and the larger community they're a part of. And so that's a long answer to say we don't think there's any one way, but those foundational pieces of your own emotional intelligence and recognizing your responsibility for not only your own development, but its impact on others. We think what we have seen in the work and the bit of evaluation that we've done with our young people, their self-efficacy, their belief that they can do something in their community to be involved is increased significantly. We're seeing the benefits across the board in our students, not only, especially the school-age students, in school attendance, school performance, but their ability to involve their peers in behaviors and in interventions that promote healthy relationships. So whether it be romantic or platonic, they recognize that in all of those relationships, they have a bystander responsibility, and they feel good about it. It feels they are entertained and they are joyous about saying they have a role in how they shape their own masculinity. And that is the thing that sustains it. And if this room was in some of the environments here in D.C., School Without Walls, you may know right down the street in George Washington University, our Men of Strength Club members, which is our youth program, exist on those campuses. Some of them are officers here at the university. Many of them are running community strength projects in their school, engaging their peers in the area. And so just 2 blocks away from us, there's an expression of young people, young men and young women, working on these issues that will sustain them when they show up on a college campus or enter into a romantic relationship for the first time. The last thing I'll say, 18 years you've been entertained by violence, and now you find yourself in a relationship on a college campus, and you want to live out all of the things that they tell you you're supposed to get to do when you go to college. Well, understanding anger or shame or embarrassment or guilt or this first time to have some kind of sexual expression, and we've been told by the media that what you're supposed to do is get her in the mood. You're supposed to romance her, right? Gone with the Wind, he tells Scarlett, you need to be kissed and kissed hard, right? And the next morning, Scarlett wakes up in the bed, right? And she's eating breakfast and she's all happy. And there's a civil war going on outside the door. So I think it's just really important to know that there's probably no one answer to your question, and yet there are multiple ways and multiple approaches, as the World Bank is exhibiting, where we can all take better care of one another.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. One thing that I noticed as important, almost like as a running thread between the comments of everybody, is what if somebody comes of age, grows up in an environment which is less than perfect? It's somewhere where a person essentially has either been abused themselves or witnessed it. And this question might be for all of the panelists, for everybody essentially, to what happens to that person? What choices do they have? If it's a male, they might see almost like as part of their development to act a certain way. And if it's female, for them to be recipient of certain type of behavior and accept it.
I think people may be interested to know that my former brother-in-law lost his mother when he was 10 years old, under suspicious circumstances, actually. Without going into too much detail, she died of an overdose of pills and her husband was a pharmacist. My sister believed that her husband's father killed his mother and told me that before she herself was murdered. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but I do know that he grew up in a very masculinized family with a father who was an Army colonel and a brother and a sister who, by all accounts, was not treated as well as the boys and sort of insisted on being a more, I guess, masculine way. I do know this. I can only speak from my own experience, but I do know statistics show that often the abusers are children of abusers. And one of the reasons why I told this story is because I really want to focus not just on the survivors of domestic violence, but absolutely on their children. Domestic violence is child abuse. This judge is wrong. And it leads to generations of violence. And so it's very important to me, and that's actually one of the major things that I learned and made me so angry that I wrote a statute and ran for office and want to try to make laws to stop that.
Well, I'll chime in here. One of the most interesting part of my clinical work is when I meet with clients and we do a genogram. So this is, we're going to map out your family history, but we're not going to just look at who parented whom, was married to whom, but we're going to look at patterns of behaviors, patterns of mental health, patterns of relationships. We can actually look at how many tense relationships there were between different people in your life. And the reason it's such a powerful tool is this is where so often I see people having that aha